we'll just go ahead and kick off. So we're going to talk about some data joins and some formulas. And the idea is to give everyone an idea of what can be done in the system. These are a few use cases, but obviously they can be applied elsewhere, the concepts. I've found that generic inquiries can be tweaked to give you almost anything that you want, depending on how hard you're willing to work. You could probably get any data view set up that way. It's probably a lot easier to code a SQL view sometimes than I make it to do the DAC or to do the generic inquiry, but I don't know how to do a SQL view by myself, so I can do this, and I do. And on top of that, just a plug here, you can actually add other GIs to GIs now, which I feel like gives you whatever you want these days. So they've added a lot of really good functionality that has made it easier to build GIs. So you can leverage results from other ones. It helps deal with some of the more complex joins that used to be required to get some of the data that you want, and now it is not. So again, these are some tips and tricks on getting those data views to work for you. So I've got an example here, and we're looking at the back end of this inquiry. And let's say we've got a need to see a project with PO information, AR information, and even appointments associated. So go into our relations here. I did cheat. I put some of these in ahead of time, but we're going to work from start to finish here. We've got our appointment on the left joined through the project to the project on the left joined to the appointment using a left join. Then we have the project joined to the PO line. In theory, this gets us all the details for this project on the PO line and the appointment itself. Problem is now we've got duplication. So not really an issue if you just want, say, I don't know, soonest appointment or oldest PO line. You can technically do that with min and max on the dates. But let's say you wanted to know hours worked as well or quantity on the PO. If I just do this right here with these two joins and go in here, we'll refresh our view. I now show that I have this massive quantity here and then a lot of hours to be worked on those appointments. And I went ahead and added these side panels to be able to see those things to kind of compare. So I've got my project purchase orders over here. Make that a little larger. So for this line that I'm highlighting, it's passing through data to another GI that shows me all details on this project. So these are all the PO detail lines, right? I can see the order quantity here says 10,000. So that should be what I see here. But clearly it's not because we're causing some duplication with our joins. So now we need to figure out how do we solve that. So this table right here, I don't know if probably someone shared it with me, but this table is, I personally think it's quite hilarious. It is a data source that has two records in it. So I'll show you the source. 1 and 2. So those are two records. So you're basically looking at a way to split one transaction into two with this, just kind of how I think about it. So if I go back into my relations and on the base record of the project, I now split it into two, right? I have a 1 and a 2 side. I can now go into these here. So for the appointment, let's go ahead and say, I want to use my report rows multiplier table, and I'm going to do this one as number 1. So equals 1. And it needs to be the row number. I've made the mistake of using the other one, which is row count, which I think is 2 for both of them. So anyways, this tells me on the one side of the transaction, grab all the details of the appointment. And then I go to the PO line. And I say the same thing, but for the second side. Okay, so we're telling this on the second side here, grab all the PO lines. And so now those two multiple one-to-many joins should not duplicate each other. we're going to test my work, but in theory, this should match this. We're doing it live. Oh, hey, Erica. So now I think that matches. My memory's not great. Look at that. Yeah, we're close. I must be looking at something other than the order quantity there. Or maybe I've filtered some out here. So the duplication on that is gone. The appointment has 25 hours on it instead of 520 or whatever it was. So we have removed the duplication between the two tables, right? So next, we want to add in, let's say, our invoice. This is another unique join that I've used in the past. The use case for this one is, let's say I've got a scenario where I need to know the last line on a transaction, right? And there's no really, outside of just hard coding in line number 5, you can't really tell it, grab the last one. So for better or worse, this has sort of worked for me. I grab the AR invoice, for instance. In this case, we're going to say that we're finding the most recent AR invoice, right? Basically the one with the greatest doc date. So I'm going to grab all the AR invoices in this first join that are related to that document. And I even added some criteria here that says, okay, they have to be released to. Technically, you could do that in conditions as well, but sometimes I do that here. All right. The next one is go out and find, and this one's a little bit more interesting. It is, okay, the node ID doesn't equal each other. So it's not the same AR invoice. They are on the same project. And then I've got kind of this criteria in here where it basically says, okay, the document date on this one that we've already joined has to be less than the document date on this one, right? I just named it. By the way, if you haven't done that, you would basically on the data sources, grab your table. I'll just go ahead and do this. Probably should have done it first. This is why you put poor presenters at the end of the day like me. And you basically name it here. So that's how you give it an alias. I always like to include the actual, table name as well. So whatever you want to put it, and then AR invoice. That's just me. Okay. So now back to this. So we're saying, okay, this document is older than this one over here. Or, and this is kind of me going above and past what I probably need to do in this scenario, but I want to get the actual most recent document. So if there are 2 invoices for the same date for some reason, that could happen, then I'm using the ref number as a tiebreaker, right? And it's grouping these all together as one kind of qualifier. So I'm going to go ahead and enable that and hope it doesn't break. The last step, because we've just basically said, okay, grab this invoice and then grab all the future invoices, right? But the next step is in your conditions that the next invoice has to be empty. And logic says if the next invoice is empty, then this invoice is the most recent, in theory, right? Let's save that. Okay. We'll go back here. Oh, I got to add my field. Sorry about that. So I go here. I'm adding my doc date, most recent. Okay. Refresh. Okay. So one thing to note is we didn't further duplicate, because in theory, you could have hundreds of invoices against a project, change project out with a customer, right? You could do the same thing with a customer. If you had a question of when did we most recently invoice the customer? So just to kind of flip this around and give you another use case for this, let's say the opposite is what you want. When was the first time we did something? You could do that as well, right? You could just come back into this logic. And if you were to flip the date to be greater than this one, and so on and so forth, and just kind of inverse the logic there, you could find the first document, because you'd be looking for the first. Basically, this one would be lower than this one or earlier than this one. and you could use that same logic. All right. So that's the first one. So hugely helpful in joins that you can do that. I don't have a great example for this, but you can run formulas in here. There have been times where it's like, I need, a date on the invoice to be matched to a period. Even that's not a great example because you have a post period on there, but let's say they're different, right? You posted it in August, but the doc date is September, something like that. You could actually run a formula to give you a matching identifier of the post period, basically the string that is created for the periods using the document date. So you could say month formula, yada, yada, and put it over here on the right, and then it equals the period ID over here on the left. That is something that I've seen done. I don't have a great example for that. That would have probably taken most of our time to walk through. So didn't want to share that, but okay. Is that me in the chat? I don't think I shared that. Okay, perfect. So next one that we have here is just walking through some formulas. So I do have another scenario that we can take a look at here on the side panel. So just using the same logic, let's use our side panel for purchase orders. Let's say we wanted this to have some logic to it. We want to color code things. I can look at this and I can quickly run through and say, okay, is it promised? Do we have stuff left? What's open? What's received? And you can dig into the data, but I would love the data to just tell me, right? So let's do that. Let me grab my formula here. And we are going to open this side panel up. It is this one. And we're going to write a row formula. Okay. So you can see the styles here. You can basically plug in what you want and say, okay, I want them all to be green. That's not super helpful, but you can do that. You could also do it on the individual columns, right? So you have those options. But let's say I wanted to write a formula. You've got the same functions you have everywhere else right here. If you wanted to take a look through them and, look at the difference. I have one ready because I cheated. So what we're saying here is if the PO line is not completed and the PO promise date is less than today, then make that line red. Otherwise, run this scenario, which is if the PO line equals completed, the one is true, right? Then make the line green. If not, just leave it default. So basically, in theory, should this work, anything that is past due and not complete is going to be red. Anything that is completed, doesn't matter about the date, is green, and everything else is just kind of standard, right? Maybe it's not an issue to be addressed. You could even add in yellow if you want to say you're waiting for it. Okay. So let's save that. Okay. Let's go ahead and go to here again. We'll see if a refresh in here will work. It might. Perfect. So these lines are done. I don't need to worry about those, right? These are past due. I probably need to take action on them, right? They're well past due. And these are still pending, but maybe I don't need to do anything with them. That's some logic you can do. All right. So let's go ahead and let's see. And again, you could actually, something that's worth noting here, let's go back to my actual GI here. If I, instead of that, wanted to do it on the description, I can take it out of the row, or if it lets me, I'm going to win this fight. All right. Okay. All right, perfect. And then I could throw it in the description. I don't know. Maybe that's the column I want to highlight. Okay. And now I'm getting lost, but let's go back here. Let's refresh. I would imagine just the description. Yep. is going to be highlighted. So you could do this. You could actually, in theory, have different calculations for different columns, right? If you want to highlight, this is past due, it's an issue, but the date is way past due, make it red. So the line's yellow, but the actual promise date's red because it's over a year. You can do a lot of different things that way, right? Okay, so that's a good example for our first formula. I have a generic inquiry here that I think is kind of unique. I really enjoyed building this one, called the project breakdown summary. The idea being everyone wants to look at their data differently, right? So in theory, what if I want to look at this project, but I want to break it down by cost code, by task, by account group, by whatever, right? Maybe it's specifically tasks and cost codes. So we kind of worked as a team to build this out, but there's a way you can use this parameter to show your data differently. So right now I've got it filtered to one project. You could run it wide open, but I think it shows the data better this way. And let's say I said, actually, I'm just interested in account group. So when I do that, it immediately shifts and says, okay, here's your revenue. Here's your materials. You can see everything here from basically just using the cost budget. It breaks it out. And it also dynamically puts in the descriptions for these things. So you'll see these are blank right now, but as we kind of expand the data set, you can see that happen. So project task, that went away because it's not broken out by account group anymore, but my task is still here and the amounts are always fluctuating based on the grouping. And then a lot of folks want to look at project and just cost code, right? I don't want to break it out by account. I just want to see my cost codes. So you can do that here. You can see all this data. So this gives you the dynamic ability to break out basically down to your budget as a whole or group it however you want. And again, you can run it wide open, but this is an option. So let's take a look at the formulas that kind of make this happen. So I will go here. I'm going to go ahead and go to my parameters first of all. If you've never set up a parameter, you would go in here. You would give the parameter type you want. You can either use a field that exists or you can give it, one of these two schemas. So I did combo box, and then you go into the values for the combo box. So I created this. I'm sure it was actually someone on my team who created this. I wasn't smart enough, but I took this and I'm presenting on this. And this is how it's broken out, right? So 1, 2, these are the values that you're storing when you select these options. So this is what the front end says. This is what the back end says. So I then went into, not the relations, I have used them here before, the groupings. And I started with just saying, okay, our base is project, right? You can never get away from the project. It's always going to at least group by the project. At least in this scenario, I guess you don't have to do that. So I just put that in as a static field. That's not going to change. The second level of group does change. So depending on your grouping level, this is that parameter here. I believe I just pulled it in from this. Yep, group level. I said if it equals 2 or if it equals 4, because let's see, that's 2, that's 4. So those both have account group in them. So if it's equal to 2 of those or 5, I guess that one had it as well, then use the account group. Otherwise, use the project. So in theory, when you're on group level 1, all of these would be the project. So you're grouping by the same field. So then in the second level, we said, okay, if it's 3, 4, or 5, use the task. So again, it should be 3, 4, 5. So you have task in all of those. So it's grouping it by task. Otherwise, use the project. Okay. And then in the next one here, we have if it's 5 or 6, use the cost code. Otherwise, use the project. And again, that's where your cost codes live. So you can kind of set this up to be very dynamic to what you're trying to display. And it can show very well. Now, one thing that's worth noting is you also have to take account of the results grid. So luckily, you can actually recycle some of this. So I kind of just take my my groupings, copied and pasted them in here for my, move this over so y'all can see it, for my account group, task, cost code, and cost code description in this case, right? And I'm basically saying, okay, just like the grouping, if it's the grouping level that includes said item, use said item. So account group CD, for instance. If it doesn't, leave it blank. And that's important, right? This is different than the grouping because I just want it to show nothing if it's not grouped by that specific level. Okay. For all of these, the exact same thing, task or it's blank. So it seems fancier than it is. Now, this is something that you can do as well, which is write formulas for the details. This one is my budget. So if I go into that, I can see if the budget type, my base table, is I, which is the income side, then take the budget amount. Otherwise, take 0, right? And then when I group, I have to tell it what to do in that grouping, and I'm telling it to sum. So when they're all lumped together, it's running a sum function, but it basically is running this formula for every one of those. So one of the things I wanted to leave time for was if y'all had any questions or scenarios you would like me to try to solve for. I may not be able to, but I can give it a run. That is most of what I had to cover today. If not, I have horrible jokes I can share. We could also do both. So leave it up to y'all. Mostly jokes. Okay, it must have been a terrible presentation. Okay, what's blue and not very heavy? It's light blue. It's very easy. So one thing that I think is really sweet. I was talking to my wife. I said, "Am I the only one you ever loved?" She said, "Yes." All the others were 7s and 8s at least. So it's a lot weirder without an audience. People don't laugh, but at least I get to see them not laughing. Something that's coming up here that's really exciting is this year's Fibonacci convention. It's going to be huge. It's apparently as big as the last 2 put together. All right, do I have questions in here? Maybe. How do you handle managing development stage while authoring them? Okay. I guess the question is, so I'm building these out. How do I keep people from seeing them and interacting with them? Is that true? Not quite. Okay. Let's see. How do you add a second GI to a GI? I can do that while waiting. Okay. So first, to add a new GI, it's very simple. You have to be on 24R1, I want to say. But basically, when you look up your source names, you can come in here and let's see if I can find one. Basically, all of these sources could end up being inquiries, right? So I can add invoices and memos as an inquiry, and then I can just join it in using the fields from it. It does kind of lock down the base one, so be aware of that. So if you went to invoices and memos, it kind of says, hey, don't touch this because you'll mess up other ones. So just something to think about. So how do I handle building out a GI with this sort of nesting in phases and stages? I honestly typically just take one pass at it, and then once you get the setup there, you can just throw it all in, I think is the answer to that question, Andrew. And then I do most of the stuff I work on, by the way, in one pass if I can. It's mostly because I have a bad memory. So Haley asked a way to highlight duplicates. Let's see. I guess you're saying duplicates on a GI. The way that I typically find duplicates is I will put the note ID. This is just my method, right? Every record should, I think, save maybe a few, have a note ID. And this gives it a unique identifier in the system. I do that. I take off all my groupings, and then I run the GI. And if I expect it to have no duplicates on those kind of mini results, I can basically export to Excel, highlight the column, either highlight duplicates, anything like that, all of those different functions to find duplicates. That's what I would do when I'm troubleshooting it. In an ideal world, you just don't have them. You find them and eliminate them right away. Yeah, I think that's the best approach. I don't know of a way in the system to say, hey, is this like the next row? There's probably a way. You could probably stretch the system to do it, but usually you just don't want duplicates. All right. PM project row. Okay. So let's go back to that. This table here, I'll go ahead and open it up as a data source or in the DAX schema browser, which we've talked about on, if anyone's ever listened to our podcast, Selena, she may or may not be on here. She probably gave up on me already. She and I do a podcast thing or video series or whatever it's supposed to be called Building Bytes. We talk about this in at least one of them. I love the DAX schema browser. Anyways, if you go to the source data, it has literally 2 records, right? So if you join it, which I've given it criteria in the past where it's like =1 on both sides, so it just joins to every project. Technically, you shouldn't have to do that, but if you get some weird results, I would go ahead and do that. Just write like your formula is =1 right, on both sides. But when you join this project is immediately duplicated. It's on 1 and 2. Just to think of it, I think of it like splitting a branch, right? So you have 2 sides to this. Then on one side, I join the appointments, which has multiple appointments to one project. And I use the row number =1 as my join conditions. And then on the 2 side, I do my project, my PO line, which is 1 to many. And I use row number =2. So it's not easy to use. It takes a little bit of practice. It's not complicated, but it's just a weird concept. But yeah, that's how I do it. I don't recommend it, but you can even branch the branches if that makes sense. So you split it 1 and 2, add the report rows multiplier a second time and add it on one of those 2 splits, split it again. It's not ideal, but you can do it. Again, I don't think Acumatica would endorse that, but okay. Let's see. I got one in here. AR-tran and AP-tran GI that has transaction level lines that are tied to a custom attribute. So you want the attribute from I'm assuming the AR invoice table or AP invoice table. That's a CS answers. If it's on the attributes, this is the table. I usually name it attribute whatever, and then just CS answers. All right. So this is how I would do that. I'd take that specific table, which is actually the results, right? So you can look through it. I would add in the specifics here. And I would say I need my attribute, right? This, I want to say the join off the top of my head. This is note ID. And this one I think is ref note ID. All right. And then the second criteria is important because that will get you all the attributes related to it, right? You could have 20 of them. So the second one that's important is naming the specific attribute this one's for. Because if you have 20 attributes, you want to prevent duplication. This is how I would do it. So go into my pencil icon. If it equals attribute 1, whatever the actual attribute ID is, you would do this. All right. If you do those two things, you should be able to place it on the results grid without an issue. There's no duplication. It should have the unique one to that invoice for that specific attribute. All right. And then you just make sure you add the value. That's important too. So the attribute value, and then I would name it so that you remember what it is, but you don't have to. Does that answer the question? Maybe. Every once in a while I look down and I see the confetti. It's reassuring. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see here. Andrew basically solves ask for. Yeah, so your question about subqueries is right. So you can effectively say, okay, I'm going to make this inquiry. You don't even have to put it on the site map to use it. And I'm going to call it in another inquiry and join it. So you effectively can do sub inquiries. I may or may not bring our internal site down trying to do some cool stuff, but obviously our side. But all right. Any other questions? I think I'm past time. So sorry about that. That's it. Hopefully someone learned something. Thank y'all for coming.